Well, if they do that, we'll consider things targets that they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it. I have options that are so strong. So, I mean, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
As Iran navigates renewed diplomatic pressure over its nuclear program and regional posture, the debate inside and outside the country has sharpened around a familiar question. Can security be achieved through negotiation with the West, or does compromise invite greater danger? Sanctions remain in force, military threats persist in the background, and talks are once again being presented as the path to stability. It is within this tense and uncertain moment that an unexpected voice entered the discussion. Aisha Gaddafi, whose country collapsed after trusting Western guarantees, addressed the Iranian public with a message shaped by Libya's experience. Drawing a direct comparison between Libya's disarmament and Iran's current predicament, she urged Iranians to examine what compliance has historically produced. Her intervention has since circulated widely, not as commentary on Libya's past, but as a caution aimed squarely at Iran's present choices. Let's talk about it in detail. Iran is not in crisis mode. That is the mistake many observers make. What Iran is in right now is decision mode, which is far more dangerous. No tanks are rolling through Tehran, no emergency declarations, no dramatic collapse forcing a rushed choice. Instead, there is something quieter and more calculated happening. Pressure is being applied evenly, patiently, from multiple directions at once, creating the sense that something must be done, not because the country is falling apart, but because endurance is being made uncomfortable. Sanctions remain firmly in place, cutting into long-term economic breathing room rather than causing immediate collapse. Western governments speak in the language of restraint and responsibility, while keeping military options conspicuously visible through allies, exercises, and constant signaling. Israel's threats hang in the background, never fully activated, never withdrawn. And in the middle of this, negotiations are floated again, not announced loudly, not celebrated, but allowed to re-enter the conversation as the reasonable path forward. This is the environment Iran is operating in. Not war, not peace, but managed tension. The key point is this: Iran is being encouraged to believe that this tension is unsustainable, that holding out indefinitely is irrational, that compromise is maturity. The pressure is psychological as much as economic. The message being transmitted is subtle but persistent. Relief is available, isolation is optional, and stability can be purchased if Iran is willing to adjust itself first. What makes this moment different from past rounds is not the content of the demands, but the framing. Limits are described as technical. Concessions are described as reversible. Inspections are described as trust building. Every proposal is wrapped in moderation. Nothing is presented as surrender, yet all of it points in the same direction, narrowing Iran's strategic space while keeping Western freedom of action intact. Iran's leadership understands this. So does its public. The debate is no longer about whether the West is hostile. That question was settled years ago. The real debate is about how hostility is managed. Is it safer to absorb pressure while maintaining leverage, or to trade leverage for promises that might reduce pressure temporarily? That is the question hanging over Tehran right now. This is not a moral dilemma. It is a structural one. History shows that the most dangerous phase for any sanctioned, targeted state is not defiance, but transition, the moment it begins reshaping itself to meet external approval. That is when expectations rise, red lines shift, and previous concessions become the baseline for new demands. Iran is acutely aware of this dynamic, which is why every negotiation is treated less like diplomacy and more like a risk assessment. Nothing has exploded yet. Nothing has collapsed yet. And that is precisely why this moment matters. Decisions made under calm pressure shape outcomes far more permanently than decisions made under panic. Iran is being asked, politely and persistently, to decide what kind of state it intends to be in a system that has never treated it as an equal. And it is exactly at this quiet, pivotal point, before anything visibly breaks, that an outside voice chose to intervene. So why did someone from Libya recognize this moment as dangerous before most others did? because this is the stage where destruction becomes optional, and therefore more likely. Aisha Gaddafi did not intervene because she follows Iranian politics closely or because she suddenly cares about nuclear negotiations. She intervened because she recognized the structure of the moment. What Iran is experiencing right now is not unique, and it is not accidental. It is the exact phase Libya entered before everything irreversible began. This is the phase where pressure is no longer applied through open confrontation, but through normalization, where demands stop sounding like threats and start sounding like advice, where the language shifts from punishment to partnership. Libya reached this point when it was told it had proven itself responsible, that its cooperation had restored trust, and that the worst was behind it. That was not the end of pressure. It was the beginning of vulnerability. Aisha understands something most analysts avoid saying clearly. Western pressure does not aim to force immediate collapse. It aims to reshape behavior gradually until resistance becomes impractical. The danger is not the demand itself, but the direction it points in. Every concession moves the line of what is considered reasonable, while hostility remains intact, simply delayed. From her perspective, Iran is being invited into the same narrowing corridor Libya entered, where each step forward feels voluntary, technical, and manageable, until suddenly there is nowhere left to stand. She is not warning Iran about talks in isolation. She is warning Iran about what happens after talks redefine expectations. What triggered her intervention is not a single proposal or headline, but the tone surrounding Iran, the insistence that restraint will be rewarded, the suggestion that sanctions relief is within reach if Iran shows flexibility. The quiet implication is that continued resistance is stubbornness rather than strategy. These are not neutral signals. They are pressure mechanisms disguised as moderation. Libya heard them too, and Libya made a fatal assumption that once it demonstrated good faith, the hostility would soften. What actually softened was Libya's ability to resist. Once leverage disappeared, so did the need for negotiation. The state was no longer something to bargain with, but something to manage, fragment, and remove. This is why Aisha's warning is addressed not to diplomats, but to the Iranian people. She understands that public exhaustion is often the final tool used to push a state into concessions its leadership might otherwise resist. When a population starts believing that compromise is the only path back to normal life, pressure has already done its job. She is also aware that moments like this are often misread. Calm is mistaken for safety. Dialogue is mistaken for trust. The absence of bombs is mistaken for restraint. But Libya was destroyed not during its loudest confrontations with the West, but after its quietest agreements. That is the recognition driving her message, not ideology, not nostalgia, pattern recognition. And once you see the pattern, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly was Libya persuaded to give up at this stage that made everything else possible? Libya did not collapse because it was reckless. It collapsed because it made a concession that redefined how it was treated. The turning point was not a battlefield defeat or an internal uprising. It was a strategic decision to trade leverage for acceptance. When Muammar Gaddafi agreed to dismantle Libya's strategic programs and open the state to intrusive oversight, it was presented as a mature step toward normalization. Sanctions would ease, relations would improve, the danger would pass. That was the promise. What actually changed was not Western hostility, but Western cost. Before that decision, Libya was difficult, unpredictable, expensive to confront. After it, Libya became transparent, compliant, and most importantly, manageable. The state revealed its capacities, its limits, its internal seams. Oversight turned into mapping. Verification turned into familiarity. Once that happened, Libya stopped being a problem that required negotiation and became a file that could be acted upon. This is the part often left out of simplified histories. The attack did not come because Libya resisted. It came after Libya proved it would not resist. The language around Libya shifted almost imperceptibly at first. Cooperation became the baseline expectation. Any internal instability was no longer treated as a sovereign issue, but as an international concern. Once Libya had accepted the premise that external actors had a legitimate say in its internal arrangements, it surrendered something far more important than weapons. It surrendered narrative control. From there, escalation required no new principles. The framework was already in place. When unrest emerged, it was no longer framed as Libya's problem to resolve, but as a moral failure requiring intervention. The same openness that had been sold as trust-building now allowed external actors to act decisively and with confidence. Libya's compliance had made its defenses legible, its response options limited, and its isolation complete. This is where the final transformation occurred. Libya was no longer a state with which terms had to be negotiated. It became a space to be stabilized, managed, and reshaped. NATO did not enter Libya to enforce agreements. It entered because the conditions created by those agreements made intervention low risk. Aisha Gaddafi's point is not that Libya was tricked once, it is that Libya crossed a threshold it could not uncross. The concession was irreversible, while the promises attached to it were optional. Once Libya lost the ability to impose consequences, it lost relevance as a negotiating actor. Everything that followed flowed naturally from that imbalance. This is the lesson she is forcing into the Iranian debate. Not that deals are inherently dangerous, but that certain concessions permanently alter how power treats you. Libya learned this too late. And that leads directly to the uncomfortable question now hanging over Tehran. Is Iran being asked to make a similar irreversible concession under the language of reason and restraint? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Yes, Iran is being pushed toward a version of the same threshold, just wrapped in cleaner language and better manners. Unlike Libya, Iran is not being asked to surrender everything at once. The approach is more refined now. Instead of total disarmament, Iran is being asked for layers of restraint. Each layer is presented as reasonable on its own. Each step is framed as technical, temporary, or reversible. But taken together, they point in a single direction, shrinking Iran's strategic room until resistance becomes theoretical rather than real. The pressure is not blunt, it is incremental. Iran is told that limits on enrichment are about reassurance, not vulnerability. That inspections are about transparency, not exposure. That regional restraint is about stability, not containment. And most importantly, that sanctions relief is waiting just beyond the next compromise. But this sequencing matters. Iran is asked to act first, prove good faith first, and weaken first, while the pressure mechanisms remain intact, merely paused. This is the critical similarity to Libya's experience. Libya did not collapse because it trusted once. It collapsed because it accepted a process in which every concession became the starting point for the next demand. What began as normalization quietly turned into supervision. Supervision turned into entitlement. Entitlement turned into intervention. Iran's situation today reflects that same logic, only more carefully executed. The West does not need Iran to disappear tomorrow. It needs Iran to become predictable, constrained, and internally divided over how much more it should give up. Negotiations serve that purpose perfectly. They slow the momentum. They drain urgency. They create the illusion that time is neutral, when in fact time under pressure always favors the side applying it. This is why Aisha Gaddafi's warning is not emotional. It is procedural. She is not saying Iran should reject every discussion. She is saying Iran should recognize when discussions are being used to extract irreversible changes under the cover of dialogue. Libya's fatal mistake was believing that the absence of immediate aggression meant safety. In reality, it meant preparation. There is another uncomfortable parallel here. Once a state accepts that its defensive posture must be approved externally, it implicitly accepts that external actors have a legitimate stake in its internal stability. That is the moment sovereignty begins to blur. Libya crossed that line quietly. Iran is being nudged toward it politely. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. That is precisely why the danger is harder to see. The most decisive shifts in power do not happen during explosions. They happen during paperwork, inspections, and confidence-building phases that seem harmless until the leverage is gone. Aisha is not warning Iran about betrayal in the abstract. She is warning Iran about processes that feel safe while they are hollowing you out. Which brings us to the question Iran now has to confront directly. If this process continues, who actually benefits from a weaker Iran, the country itself, or the powers applying the pressure? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The answer is not complicated, but it is rarely stated plainly: not Iran. A weaker Iran does not suddenly become safer, richer, or more accepted. It becomes easier to pressure, easier to threaten, easier to shape without consent. That is the quiet objective underlying the entire process. The goal is not reconciliation, it is manageability. A state that cannot impose costs is a state that must accept terms. This is why the pressure never fully lifts. Sanctions might be eased, then snap back. Talks might pause, then resume. Threats might soften, then return louder. The cycle itself is the mechanism. It keeps Iran focused inward, debating how much more it can afford to give up, rather than outwardly questioning why it is being pressured in the first place. From the Western perspective, a constrained Iran solves multiple problems at once. It weakens Iran's regional influence without requiring open conflict. It reassures allies by reducing uncertainty. It lowers the risk and cost of future action, should it ever be deemed necessary. Most importantly, it keeps strategic initiative firmly in Western hands. This is where Libya's lesson becomes unavoidable. Libya did not become prosperous or stable after compliance. It became exposed. Once its leverage disappeared, so did the incentive to respect its sovereignty. What followed was not negotiation, but management of territory, resources, and political outcomes. The same powers that once demanded restraint suddenly claimed authority. Iran is being asked to believe that this time will be different. Those rules will be honored, that guarantees will hold, that restraint will be reciprocated. But history does not support this optimism. Power respects strength, not goodwill. Agreements hold only when breaking them carries consequences. This is the trap Aisha Gaddafi is pointing to. A weaker Iran does not gain trust. It loses relevance. Once relevance is gone, so is bargaining power. At that point, every future demand becomes easier to justify, because resistance has already been framed as unreasonable. There is also a deeper cost that rarely gets discussed: internal erosion. Prolonged negotiation under pressure fractures societies. It pits pragmatists against hardliners, patience against fear, hope against suspicion. Over time, the debate shifts from "what do we want?" to "what can we afford to lose next?" That psychological shift is as damaging as any sanction. The West understands this dynamic well. It does not need to defeat Iran militarily to achieve its objectives. It only needs Iran to doubt itself long enough to make irreversible choices. This is why the question Iran faces now is not abstract or ideological. It is practical and immediate. If continued concessions primarily serve to reduce Iran's ability to resist future pressure, then whose security is actually being improved? Which leads to the final and unavoidable question Iran must answer before anything else is decided. Once leverage is gone and promises expire, what exactly will Iran have left to protect itself with? What Iran is deciding right now is not a policy detail or a negotiation tactic. It is deciding when the line stops moving. Every state under sustained pressure eventually reaches this point, where the question is no longer how to reduce tension, but how much tension is acceptable in exchange for survival. That is the decision Iran is circling, even if it is rarely stated that plainly. The danger is not that Iran will sign a deal. The danger is that Iran will internalize the idea that pressure is normal, permanent, and best managed through continual adjustment. That mindset turns strategy into maintenance. Instead of asking what preserves long-term security, the focus narrows to what eases the next round of pressure. That is how irreversible concessions are made without ever being announced as such. This is why Aisha Gaddafi's message lands where it does. She is not arguing theory. She is describing a sequence. Libya did not wake up one day and choose collapse. It made a series of rational, well-argued decisions that all pointed in the same direction. Each one seemed manageable. Each one was defended as necessary. And together, they produced a moment where resistance was no longer an option. Only outcomes were. Iran is still before that moment. That is the critical difference. Nothing has been surrendered yet that cannot be defended. Nothing has been agreed to that cannot be reconsidered. Iran still possesses leverage, uncertainty, and the ability to impose costs. That is precisely why pressure remains intense. The system only relaxes when resistance becomes irrelevant. The final decision, then, is not between diplomacy and confrontation. It is between preserving the ability to say no and entering a process where saying no becomes unthinkable. A state that can still refuse terms retains agency. A state that cannot refuse, no matter how polite the language, is already being managed. Iran's leadership understands this at an institutional level. The public understands it intuitively. What makes the moment dangerous is fatigue, the desire for normal life, economic relief, and predictability. Pressure is designed to make those desires override strategic caution. That is not an accident, it is the objective. Aisha Gaddafi's role in this story is not to instruct Iran, but to remove the illusion that time itself will solve the problem. Time under pressure does not neutralize threats, it sharpens them. Deals do not end hostility, they reshape it. The only thing that changes outcomes is whether a state retains enough strength to make its choices matter. Iran has not crossed the point of no return. But history shows that once that line is crossed, it is never announced in advance. It is only recognized afterward, when options have narrowed to zero. And that leaves Iran with the question that cannot be postponed any longer. How much pressure is it willing to endure today to avoid a future where it no longer gets to choose at all? Let us know in the comments section what Iran should do now. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.